Introduce our first spotlight speaker of the day, and that's Mike Sharples. He's Emeritus Professor of Educational Technology at the Open University UK. He also acts as academic lead on the FutureLearn and the nQuire platforms. He's the founder of the annual Innovating Pedagogy series of reports, and he's the author of over 300 papers. And his most recent book has just come out. He has a few copies on him. It's published by Routledge, and it's called Practical Pedagogy: 40 New Ways to Teach and Learn. And in today's presentation, Mike is going to give us some insights about how to design digital learning at scale. The floor is yours, Mike. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me at the back okay? Good. Yes, my name's Mike Sharples. Rather compressed slides. You imagine it a little wider than that. So, I'm from the Open University in the UK. And just before I start, I want to say something about that logo up at the top right. Let's see if this works. Yes. The Open University 50 years. So it's our 50th anniversary of the Open University in the UK. So 1969 was an exciting year. So the United States put 2 men on the moon through the Apollo program. And in the UK, we set up the Open University. In 1972, the Apollo program ended. The Open University is still going 50 years later. And during those 50 years, 2 million people have had an opportunity to study higher education. What was unique about the Open University was not only that it was a distance learning university, but it was open, and still is, open access. You don't need any qualifications to be able to study at the Open University, but it is a full research-led, degree-awarding university, and the output from the Open University is students with as high qualifications as any other university. 2 million people have studied at the Open University. We have 170,000 current students, 24,000 of those with disabilities. We encourage people with disabilities to study at the Open University. And also we have 2 free open platforms. FutureLearn, that has had 69 million visits, mainly for pre-university courses and content, and over 9 million learners, just coming up for 10 million learners now on the FutureLearn MOOC platform that was set up by the Open University. So we do distance learning at massive scale. So how do we engage thousands of people in active, social, and inquiry-led learning? And that's what I want to talk about briefly today. How do we get thousands of people to engage in learning online? And the answer is pedagogy-led design. So technologies, you will be hearing about many technologies during the next few days. Some exciting technology. As an education technologist, it's an exciting time to be alive, to be around. There are many new technologies coming along. But technology alone is not going to transform education. It's something we realized probably 10, 15 years ago after we experimented with different types of online technology. What's going to transform education is the combination of pedagogy and technology. Now, what do I mean by pedagogy? By pedagogy, I mean the theory and practice of teaching, learning, and assessment. And back in 2012, we were looking at a number of reports that were coming out, such as the Horizon reports on the future of learning with technology. And the focus of all those reports was on the technology, the new and emerging technologies for education. And we realized then there wasn't... Great. Thank you. Thank you for widening out my talk. So at that point, we realized there wasn't anything similar that focused on the theory and practice of teaching, learning, and assessment. So we set up a series of reports called Innovating Pedagogy, starting in 2012. They're all free, and if you go to open.ac.uk/innovating, you can read all of the reports since then, and they've been successful. We've had about 300,000 downloads since 2015, and they've been translated into a number of languages, including Spanish, Portuguese, Chinese. And as a result of that, I also wrote a book called Practical Pedagogy, 40 New Ways to Teach and Learn, which is a kind of digest of the best of those reports, particularly aimed at teachers and practitioners. So how does pedagogy influence design? Most of you who are familiar with the design of technologies, interactive technologies, will recognize this sort of diagram. It's the Agile development process of personal and interactive technologies. And basically, this process is to start with some idea, to start with some vision, to start with some overarching idea or set of general requirements, and then to go through an iterative cycle of design, development, release, testing, influencing that idea, and then going through another cycle. And each time you go through that cycle, you get an early release of the software. Initially, that would be tested in-house, and then as it develops through this iterative cycle of design, it then gets more widely distributed, developed, disseminated, and tested. So that's the Agile software development process. Pedagogy-led design takes that process and starts from a pedagogy, starts from a theory of teaching, learning, and assessment. That's the initial idea concept. And also the testing and feedback includes not just whether it meets the original requirements, not just that it has a pleasant user interface, but also that it satisfies the pedagogy. So you're testing against learning processes and outcomes. So that's the basis of pedagogy-led design. And I want to emphasize that it's very different from the way in which many educational technologies are designed at the moment, which is either to start with a particular technology, how can we get virtual reality into the classrooms, or what would a smartboard do if you put it into schools. The starting point is not with the technology and how can you insert it into education, it's with a pedagogy. And also the testing is not against a set of features. It's not against how can we add another feature to the technology. It's testing against the pedagogy. So I'm going to give you two examples. That's all I've got time for. So these are a set of core pedagogies, core ways of teaching and learning. And just about any system that you have, whether it's technology-led or not, will have one or more of those at the heart of it. And you can use this table in two ways. One way is that you can use it to understand and to assess current ways of teaching and learning. So you can look at a classroom or an online learning environment and say, what sort of pedagogy does it embody? Does it provide delivered content? Does it do assessment? Can the learners browse the content? So that's one way, is to try and understand, and also the proportion of the different sorts of pedagogies, the different methods of teaching and learning. But you can also use it in a generative way to say, what would happen if, just take two at random, what would happen if you had embodied game-based design? So if you took embodied learning and game-based learning and put them together and design technology to support those pedagogies, would that be a good idea, and what would be the result? So you look at then how those pedagogies can enable you to generate new ways of teaching and learning. So I'm going to take two of these, and particularly ones that might improve with scale. So there are some pedagogies that just don't work at scale. So if you take embodied learning, like sports coaching, it might work if for 2 people if you're doing tennis coaching, 10 people if you're coaching a soccer team, but it doesn't scale up. most pedagogies are pretty impervious to scale. So what I'm doing now, lecturing, I'm lecturing to you in the room. It's also being recorded, so the people who watch it will get pretty much the same experience. And that was the basis of most MOOC platforms. You take a lecture and you make it available online so that more people can interact with it. But it doesn't really get better with scale. So which pedagogies improve the more people who take part? Well, I want to choose two of those: conversational learning and inquiry-driven, and give you examples. So conversational learning at scale. I wish I could have time to talk about learning as conversation in depth. It comes from a UK educational theorist and educational technologist, Gordon Pask, as interpreted by many other people, including Diana Laurillard. And it's a grand theory of learning. It's a theory of learning based on cybernetics. But at the heart of it is this idea that all human learning involves conversation. We converse with ourselves to reflect on our experience, to say, how does this new experience relate to previous experience? We converse with teachers to understand their expert knowledge. And we converse with other learners to try and reach a shared understanding. But the great thing is that the more people who take part, the richer the conversations, the more perspectives you get on that conversation. And it also works as a design framework for technology, because you can then start to design technologies to enable different sorts of productive conversation, to enable reflective conversations, peer conversations, and conversations between teachers and learners. Now, going back to 2012, I was asked by the Vice-Chancellor of the Open University to be academic lead to work with the newly formed FutureLearn company. The Open University set up FutureLearn as a separate company, and we had a software team that were brought in to design a platform from scratch. And so we had to decide how we were going to design it. And we knew that we didn't want to design it in the same way as other MOOC platforms. We didn't want to design it around delivered content and assessment. So after a long discussion with the software team, we decided to design the FutureLearn platform around learning as conversation. And again, I want to emphasize, it's not just a matter of adding a few features. That was at the heart of the design process. So we designed for conversational learning. And that meant we had to make a number of decisions. One of the main decisions we made at the start was, where should those conversations take place? On almost all previous platforms, the learners were sent off to a separate area to have a chat, to have a conversation, to forums. The first decision we made was that we were going to have the conversations linked to the content, because the most productive conversations occur when they are grounded in learning content. So we made the decision to put the conversations alongside the content. We made many other decisions about how we design the assessment and so on, around, for instance, peer review and making a conversational approach to peer review. But I'm just going to focus on that one. So I'll give you an example of how that works. So this is a course from the University of Reading on the FutureLearn platform. It's called Rome, a virtual tour of the ancient city. And it's the work of a senior academic who spent 10 years creating a virtual model of Rome. And in his model, and also when you join the course, you can not only view that model of ancient Rome, as you're seeing here, but you can interact with it. You can go into the Colosseum by pressing buttons on your keyboard. You can go into the Colosseum. You can go and sit in different seats. So each learner experiences ancient Rome. They start by experiencing the environment of ancient Rome. They explore an interactive digital model of the city. And the educators ask questions that prompt conversation and exploration. So the learners discuss their personal experiences of engaging with this interactive model of Rome. So here, did you try sitting in the various categories of seats within the digital model? How did the different perspectives change your understanding of how people experience the games. So you start by asking the learners to experience a new environment and then to discuss it. And what happens then when they do that? Well, down the right-hand side, you can see part of that conversation. And I've just taken two examples pretty much at random, so these are not being cherry-picked. The first one, I was looking for this subject, and I found a paper that says the Roman architects devised an ingenious system of entrances, corridors, and staircases that allowed the crowds to enter and exit the Colosseum quickly and easily. There were 80 separate entrance arches. It could be cleared in 10 minutes, better than a FIFA football stadium. So that was somebody, a learner, who went off and researched how to get in and out of the Colosseum. Another one, they're talking about the medical facilities for gladiators in the Colosseum. These were learners who were prompted by the educator's question to go off and do their own bit of research, bring it back and share it with others. And every FutureLearn course, just about, you find people bringing their own perspectives. Either their perspective from doing a bit of research outside the platform and bringing it back in again, or their personal perspectives. I did a course called The Secret Power of Brands, which is something I would never do on a paid-for course, but I got it for free on FutureLearn. And it was fascinating, because people from different nationalities were talking about their perceptions of some global brands, of Nike, of Uniqlo, of other brands from Japan, from India. So people were bringing their perspectives into the learning. Does it work? You should always be suspicious of figures and statistics, but we did do a comparison. We did a comparison of courses that ran up to 2015. Between FutureLearn, Coursera, and edX. And what we found was the percentage of people who visited the course was pretty much the same for the series of courses. The learners who were active, engaged with the course material, were pretty much the same. But the two big differences were the learners who posted at least one comment. For Coursera and edX, it was on the forum. On FutureLearn, it was on the conversation beside the content. And the completing learners, the learners who completed the course. So at the very least, there was more engaged conversation on the FutureLearn courses, and there was a higher completion rate. So that was designing a platform around learning as conversation, starting from a pedagogy of learning as conversation. But those are the statistics. I just want to give you one quote from a learner. I read through the above article. So this was somebody who was commenting on a piece of content on a different course, on an ecosystems course. I read through the above article and I thought, that's interesting. And then I read the comments below and suddenly thought a whole lot more. It's almost as if the basic course is in 2D, but the postings, the conversations, lift it to 3D and make it really come alive. So that's learning as conversation as a pedagogy to design learning at scale. I just want to talk about one more briefly, which is inquiry learning at scale. So that is the idea of conversational social learning before. Could you do the same for inquiry learning? So some years ago, about 10 years ago now, we started out on a journey to design inquiry-based science learning. We started it in school classrooms, science inquiries that started through teachers working with students in classrooms, trying to develop good inquiry questions, which the students then took outside the classroom. They collected data outside the classroom, brought it back into the classroom. It was moderately successful. We got some really good examples, some good inquiries that came from the young learners. One of them, the most successful, I think, was around what was the effect of pollution on animals in cities. And through the discussions with 14-year-old children, they came up with the question, are birds affected by noise in cities? Are birds scared away by noise in cities? And they put up bird feeders around the school grounds, in noisy areas of the school grounds and in quiet areas of the school grounds. And they measured the amount of food that had been eaten from the noisy areas and from the quiet areas over 3 days. And what they anticipated, what they hypothesized, was that there'd been more food eaten from the quiet areas than the noisy areas to look at whether birds are frightened by noise. And what they found was exactly the opposite. They found that more food was eaten from the noisy areas than the quiet areas. So, like good scientists, they set up a webcam, and they found there was a big, fat, greedy pigeon that was eating all of the food. So they did another study in a garden, to cut a long story short, where they found what they had hypothesized. That was in the school classrooms, and there were a lot of excitement, but also a lot of difficulty with it, particularly for the teachers on that lesson when the students bring back into the classroom their data, their findings, and the teacher has to improvise around it. So about 6 years ago, we decided, could we do something similar, but not just in the school classrooms, but at bigger scale? Could we do that sort of question-led inquiry learning on a bigger scale? Why? Because inquiry is central to learning. Once students learn how to ask good questions and find valid answers to those questions, they can become active learners on any subject. Questioning and inquiry is central to active learning. So we developed this idea of a pedagogy of citizen inquiry, of inquiry learning at scale. And the idea is to take citizen science, which is an increasingly popular and effective way of doing large-scale science, which is where you have scientists pose questions and members of the public then provide data to help answer those questions. And it's scalable, big science. But what we wanted to do was to say, can you bring an element of inquiry learning into that? And so we turned it around. We kind of did a flipped version of citizen science, where instead of the scientists asking the question and getting members of the public to provide data to help the answers, that members of the public, individuals or groups, can ask the question and then recruit other people, including scientists, to try and help find the answers. So that's where the crowdsourcing comes in. So anyone can take a question, can put a question, and then get other people to try and provide the data, the resources to answer it. And it's scalable, because the more people that take part, the richer the inquiry, the greater the range of data, and the greater the conversations that you could have around that data if you make that data open for people to discuss. So that's the idea behind citizen inquiry. It's a kind of flipped version of citizen science. And we've now designed a platform for that. So it's a collaboration with the BBC. So we're very fortunate at the Open University to have this opportunity to work with the BBC, and we have for a whole 50 years of the Open University. And we've developed this new platform with them to do citizen inquiry at scale. It's there, www.nquire.org.uk, and it's designed for mobile devices as well as fixed devices, so please go to it and have a look. And here are some of what we call missions on the nQuire platform. The one on the top left was a national survey of British gardens. It's the first time that we've ever had in the UK a survey of British gardens, the wildlife, because it's difficult to do. You need to get hundreds of thousands of people involved, and we did. We had 250,000 people who contributed to that survey. The one on the top right was an investigation into creativity and well-being, providing personalized feedback with 40,000 completions. But down on the left, we also have the ability to have open social missions, rather like FutureLearn, where every response, every piece of data can then be linked to a conversation. So one around classroom noise and stress. And with that one, you can use the sensors on a mobile phone. So every mobile phone is a miniature scientific device. It has multiple sensors on it. And in this case, you can use a sound sensor, the microphone, on your mobile device to collect noise levels, relate them to classroom noise and to stress. another one in the middle for schools around being able to distinguish between fact and fake news. But what's important is that you can not only take part in these missions, anyone can take part, you can also design them. So it's an open platform for designing new forms of inquiry learning. So it's multiply open. It's open source code. It's open for anybody to take part in a mission. It's open for discussion. So we have two sorts of missions. Ones that are more like surveys, where you provide personal data and that data is not made available. But other ones where, for instance, we've got one on cloud spotting. People post pictures of clouds and try to identify them. All the data there is open for discussion. It's open for access on mobile devices, and it's open for any person or organization to create a new mission. So go and try it. Try it for yourself. So I've given two examples there of the way in which pedagogy provides a starting point for design. And I want to suggest it's a rich way to explore new possibilities for education technology. From that list at the start of 16 pedagogies, you can make many different combinations. And you can also then rate the success against the pedagogy. Does it provide that form of effective teaching and learning? And to finish, there are many more ways to design digital learning. I gave 16 pedagogies at the start. These are the 40 pedagogies from the book, Practical Pedagogy. Some of them I'm sure you'll be familiar with, like learning to learn, computational thinking. I bet that none of you will be familiar with all 40 of them, like stealth assessment, translanguaging, humanistic education communities. They are a resource for you to explore for teaching in classrooms, in universities, but also in designing education technology. And I hope that all of you will be convinced at least that pedagogy-informed design is a productive new way to develop technology for the future. Thank you.